Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we study Job chapter 30. But now they laugh at me, men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. What could I gain from the strength of their hands, men whose vigor is gone? Through want and hard hunger they gnaw the dry ground by night and waste and desolation. They pick saltwort and leaves of bushes, and the roots of the broom tree for their food. They are driven out from human company. They shout after them as after a thief. In the gullies of the torrents they must dwell, in holes of the earth and of the rocks. Among the bushes they bray, under the nettles they huddle together. A senseless, nameless brood, they have been whipped out of the land. And now I have become their song. I am a byword to them. They abhor me. They keep aloof from me. They do not hesitate to spit at the sight of me. Because God has loosed my cord and humbled me, they have cast off restraint in my presence. On my right hand the rabble rise. They push away my feet. They cast up against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path. They promote my calamity. They need no one to help them. As through a wide breach they come, amid the crash they roll on. Terrors are turned upon me. My honor is pursued as by the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold of me. The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. With great force my garment is disfigured. It binds me about like the collar of my tunic. God has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand you persecute me. You lift me up on the wind, you make me ride on it, and you toss me about in the roar of the storm. For I know that you will bring me to death, and to the house appointed for all living. Yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand, and in his disaster cry for help? Did I not weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But when I hoped for good, evil came, and when I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. I go about darkened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. My skin turns black and falls from me, and my bones burn with heat. My lyre is turned to mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. This is the word of the Lord. So we saw yesterday, Job views this situation that he's in as he once was blessed by God, once was favored by God, and so he had a great life. And he's longing for that. And now that it was all taken away, he thinks God is opposed to him, that God has abandoned him. And I think at this point in this chapter, he even goes a step further than that and claims not only has God abandoned him, God has totally turned against him and is the one who is bringing all of this wrong upon him. So it's certainly a big shift from, again, where we were in yesterday's chapter, although it was all coming. Like Job was building up to this conversation. Job is disrespected even by these worthless men. That's the first section. So the men who are younger than Job, rather than yielding to him in the city gate like they used to, now they make fun of him. They laugh at him. And he notes that these men come from nothing. Like these men who are laughing at him, who make fun of him, their fathers would not have even been given a place among Job's dogs in the past. That's a sizable insult. But if it weren't enough, he's going to unpack that for the next 7 verses. They have no more strength. And he's going to go on to talk about how despised these men are. These men who wouldn't even have worked for Job, even with his dogs. They scavenge. They're left to find whatever they can gnaw on. They eat tree roots for food and leaves. They're chased off by other people. Like you can picture that "stop thief" kind of language as we have Job saying here. They shout after them as they shout after a thief. So they chase him off. I mean, a biblical picture similar to that would be like a leper. This almost sounds like a leper colony. These guys, they're not allowed anywhere near anybody else. They have to live, verse 6, in the paths, like the holes and the ruts that have been carved out by the heavy rains and waters. So they don't even get to live in the town and the village with the people. And yet these now mock Job. He has become their song. They sing songs of taunt and mockery about him. He's a byword to them. So that's again that way of greeting one another that we saw early in the book, where he's almost like a curse word that they would speak to one another, his name. He's abhorred, he's hated. He's disrespected by them. They even spit at the very sight of him. These men who can't even live in town with anybody else. And why? Verse 11, because God has loosed my cord and humbled me. I'm reading that loosed my cord idea almost like clothing. Loosed his cord like a belt, and so God has stripped him bare. God has humbled him. God has taken away all that he had. And now his enemies don't even restrain themselves. They don't hold back. They don't hold their tongue. They say whatever they want. They mock him as they please. They rise against him. They push him away. They promote his calamity. This has honestly been the view that Job has of his friends, right? That they're promoting his calamity, that they're not helping him. But verse 14, as through a wide breach they come, a reference to the frequency, the intensity of the mockery. A wide breach is like if you picture a city under attack, the city walls are preventing the attack from really being devastating. It's keeping the attack at bay, and then all of a sudden the wall falls. You have a breach in the wall. There's a hole in the wall, and some of the invading army can get through. That's not good. But a wide breach, the army is just rushing in at this point, and that's how Job feels of the attack against him. My prosperity, verse 15, has passed away like a cloud. A cloud is here in the sky one moment, and then shortly thereafter it's gone. So as Job's prosperity disappeared from upon him. Verse 16, my soul is poured out within me, a reference to thinking he's dying again. Just the despair that he's in. The days of affliction have taken a hold of him. The night racks my bones. So the days afflict him, the night racks him. To rack one's bones is it's a reference to torture. For the sake of maybe your children understanding it, attacks. It's a good rhyming word there. The night attacks my bones. He feels the pain in his bones all day, all night. This is the point that he's making. Even his clothing is disfigured at this point. And he is unrecognizable. Verse 19, God has cast me into the mire. I have become like dust and ashes. That is the punishment for our sin. From Genesis chapter 3. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. A reference to death. But he is blaming God for having cast him into this. This is God's fault in his mind. And verse 20, I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. That's one you want to unpack with your kids. Is that a true statement? Is it true that God does not answer? God hears the prayers of his people, and he answers the prayers of his people, and he is about to really specifically answer Job, coming up, in about a week's time in our text. But the Lord doesn't always answer our prayers the way we want him to answer our prayers. It doesn't always look the way we want it to. But just because God doesn't give you everything you want in life does not mean God does not hear you, nor does it mean God has not answered you. He knows much better than we what we need, and he provides for us. Verse 21, again, I mentioned at the start of the text that not only does Job view God as having abandoned him, he blamed God for all of this. You have turned cruel to me. The might of your hand you persecute me. He views God as being totally against him. He's wrong in that matter, by the way, but think of it this way. If God were totally against him, would he still be alive? Would he be enduring on the brink of death for weeks? If God persecuted Job with the might of God's hand, Job would have died instantly. God is all-powerful. And thankfully, he has wielded that power to save us, not to destroy us. You toss me about in the roar of a storm, another reference to God attacking him in his mind. I know that you will bring me to death, to the house appointed for all the living. That would be the grave, or Sheol, that he's mentioned many times in the book. Slight turn, right? Verse 24, yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand, so does he not reach out for aid, and in his disaster cry for help? So maybe a reference to prayer there from Job, that he's going to cry out anyway. This is a time where you could talk to your children about what we might do when the times get rough. When things are bad for us in our lives, what do we do? And indeed, prayer is the starting point, and that's true anytime, not just in the bad times, but we pray in the bad times as well, that the Lord would hear us, that the Lord would help us. Job in verse 25 is essentially asking why, if he aided others, why is he not being aided likewise? Instead of receiving aid, evil stuff has come. Hoped for good, evil came. Hoped for light, darkness came. That is true in this world. As we long to live a quiet and peaceful life, sometimes we don't get that. Sometimes evil comes against us. This is true. Verse 29, I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. The reference to wild animals that God uses to overrun. I mean, like you think of the desolation of Israel under the prophet Isaiah's time, where God says that their homes will even be taken from them and will be basically the haunt of jackals at that time. So those animals get referenced in that idea of desolation and abandonment, deserted area. And so Job says these are his only company, animals of deserted places. So he's all alone. No other men with him. Just odd, because there are 3 others at least sitting around him right now. And we're about to see a 4th for the first time, not tomorrow, but the day after. My skin turns black and falls from me, which he said already in a couple of verses before. In verse 28 is not because of the sun, it's because his skin is decaying. That illness that the devil has afflicted him with, that is causing him all this pain and suffering, it is destroying his flesh. Verse 31, the wrapping up of the chapter. Musical instruments. The lyre is like a harp, but I think smaller, if I recall correctly. And then the pipe, a couple of different styles of pipes as musical instruments. But these 2 things, instead of using them for rejoicing and perhaps even praising God, Job is now using instruments to grieve, to mourn all that he has lost. We have one more chapter here of Job in this lengthy speech of his. Most of the stuff was kind of a back and forth, but this has been chapter number 5 out of 6 for Job's continued speech. So we will wrap this one up tomorrow
with more of a summary appeal to God.